Morning, everyone. We will get started. I see we still have lots of people joining us, but we'll begin the webinar. My name is Ian Campbell. I am Vice President of Operations at PACICC, and I'm your staff lead for the Risk Officers Forum, and I'm your host for this morning's broadcast. Welcome, everyone. I think we have about 155 people from almost 70 companies right across Canada joining us, so welcome, everyone. And if this is your first time joining us, a special welcome. This is our second webinar of 2023. I want to thank my colleague in advance, Danica Hall, is working behind the scenes with the slides and just to make sure everything runs smoothly here this morning. So thank you, Danica. I encourage you to relax and enjoy the next 90 minutes of conversation. Danica has posted the agenda there. So the housekeeping items I will walk through before moving to introduce the industry discussion. And our speakers this morning are Alistair Campbell, President and CEO of PACICC, and Craig Stewart, Vice President, Climate Change and Federal Issues with IBC. Then I'll talk about our next Risk Officers Forum. Our next event is a Risk Officers Forum meeting in September and the satisfaction survey. So in terms of housekeeping items, everyone in this COVID world is familiar with the Teams platform. You see across your taskbar on the top the raise hands. This is a very interactive and conversational webinar, so we do invite your questions and comments in real time as we go through the broadcast. So just click the raise hand and we will recognize you, ask you to put your camera on, activate your mic and introduce yourself and pose your question or your comment. And then that will be addressed by Alistair and Craig. The antitrust compliance is in effect. The Competition Act is in effect. You are competitors throughout the broadcast. Our lawyers love to hear us remind you of that. So do keep that in mind. This is an industry meeting, but it is not a session where we're colluding. The meeting is being recorded. It will be posted on our website shortly after the broadcast, and that will be of use for anyone not able to join us now in real time. So let's move on to introduce our two speakers for this morning. This is going to be kind of a fireside chat. We have Alistair Campbell, our President and CEO, and he's going to be in discussion with Craig Stewart, Vice President, Climate Change and Federal Issues with the Insurance Bureau of Canada, and they're going to be talking about climate change and adaptation. So no further ado here, I'm going to throw it to Alistair, and Alistair is going to introduce Craig, and they're going to go right into the broadcast. So thanks for being here, and over to you, Alistair.
Thanks, Ian, and happy Friday, everyone. I suspect you're not alone if you're thinking that the end of this will be kind of close to the finish line for a long week before a great long weekend. But we do have, I think, a fantastic session organized for you with real value add, and I'm glad so many of you are able to join us today. Thanks so much for that. A couple of quick thoughts, and then Craig is going to take it from there. The insurance industry is pretty good at managing exposure to physical perils. We have been doing it for centuries. And of course, over time, the industry evolved from managing shipping risk from wind and water, and has even moved past physical risks to take significant risk transfer for liability, or even in recent times, things like cyber. But physical peril is what we are pretty good at, which is what makes the topic around flood, which we're going to get to momentarily, so interesting today. Because on a list of physical perils we were good at in Canada, flood would not be one of them. And so I think back to my early training in the insurance industry in personal lines, when Winnipeg used to back up 8 years out of 10, and the basements would get very damp in a very big city when the Red River did its thing. And huge efforts made on the infrastructure side were critical to managing that, because less than huge efforts were made by the insurance industry, where we worked carefully to limit coverage. And even if there was sewer backup coverage, it would have a very strict sublimit on it. And that's when I learned in my early training how to distinguish between clear water and brown water. And that's kind of where we were as an industry until 2013. And then events moved really fast, and our industry has responded in a, I think, highly commendable fashion to a rapidly shifting reality, which was that even if flood wasn't covered, and historically Canada hadn't had to worry about it because most of us are built on rock and we're fine. The reality exposed by both the Calgary and Toronto floods in 2013 was that the world was changing. And that became very relevant as our industry suddenly leapt to the challenge of working out how to provide risk transfer solutions for flood. And we started thinking about mapping, and we started trying to work out the distinction between pluvial and fluvial, and developing products, first one off by one insurer or another, but then within a period of time, a reasonably nicely aligned set of coverage solution options for consumers at a price across a large portion of the personal property market. So a big evolution for our industry, and it happened, if you think about it, in a decade. And the compounding reality that we were dealing with was that, as one of my favorite senior underwriters once explained it to me, he didn't really care what the debate was about what was causing the climate to change, but he just knew that we were getting a lot more water, and it was landing in more intense concentrated bursts. Those concentrated bursts were arriving on increasingly urbanized terrain, then draining into sewage and water main that had not been adequately invested in for 50 years, and then backing up into what didn't used to be finished basements, but which now had customized millwork and Persian carpets and a home entertainment theater for 20. And the losses were material. And so, both from an insurance perspective and from a public policy perspective, flood has continued to amplify as the climate has changed. And so that is kind of the context for where we got to in the last, I'd say, 24 months, which was a pretty comprehensive solution set of insurance coverage options for, let's say, 85 or 90% of the population. But you run into an affordability and accessibility issue for a subset of the population. And that is the subset at highest risk. And that goes directly to reputational risk for the industry, highly problematic political issues in the course of flood events for politicians and thus for regulators, and a clear need for some form of public-private partnership to manage that design problem around the insurance industry's sensibly enough aversion to assuming risks that can't be adequately priced, or where the risk is just so obviously more than coverage can be provided for. And so that kind of sets the table for at least the flood portion of the discussion we're going to have this morning. Now, by way of introducing Craig, let me just say, yeah, I had the privilege of serving on the board of IBC in a previous stage of my career. I was part of the process of selecting a new CEO at the time, Don Forgeron. And the mandate that we provided to Don and the IBC team was to become fundamentally the most polished government relations organization in Canada, and to kind of be less distracted by other issues and other operational challenges for industry infrastructure on the tech side, or around auto theft from organized crime. You know, you could work out other ways to tackle those issues. IBC should focus on GR. But what Don, smart leader that he was, worked out correctly was that the best government relations is good public policy. And so over the last few years, the IBC has achieved, I would say, best practice government relations capabilities, both federally and provincially. But the most important development is the way that we have invested in the policy development side of the model and as a result have moved to a point where we are well positioned to be a public policy partner in the evolution of solution sets for public policy accountable folks in the bureaucracies of the provinces and the government of Canada. And where that has proven to be most effective is under the leadership of our guest this morning, Craig, who has captained an outstanding achievement in IBC's long history by getting a core issue for the industry embedded in the core public policy objectives of the federal government. And that is really hard and a super piece of work. And we should all be very proud of what IBC's accomplished and grateful that they have done it so quickly and effectively. When I say quickly, public policy only moves at a certain pace. And we will discuss that a little bit next as well. So just quickly to Craig personally, his title is Vice President Climate Change and Federal Issues. I think there's been a lot of public policy debate over the last couple of decades about who is actually accountable for climate change, and now we know. It's not big oil, it's Craig. And so that's a heavy burden that he bears with that title. But he's well qualified for it. He's been so engaged on this file across his career and has played a key role in the evolution of our industry's interests on this. So suffice it to say that I think it's a super opportunity. After the last budget, the finance minister declared very firmly how central adaptation to climate change and a partnership with the industry was going to be going forward. That was a marker of an accomplishment that Craig is going to describe a little bit more about next. And so I will stop rambling at this point. It's a real pleasure, Craig, to have you here this morning. Looking forward to your talk, and then we'll do a little bit of back and forth because I'll probably have a couple of annoying questions at least. And as Craig makes his comments, folks, if you do have questions or comments, stick them in the chat or put up your hand, and let's see where this discussion goes. Craig, over to you.
Well, thanks so much, Alistair, for the kind words, and thank you to Alistair and Danica and team for the invitation. I was pretty excited to have the opportunity to be able to speak to all of you today, and thanks to all of you for showing up before a long weekend for what will be a pretty policy-heavy presentation. So, as Alistair said, my work focuses on Ottawa, heavily on the federal government. I focus on natural catastrophes and climate change. I wouldn't be able to present to you without talking about earthquake. I joined IBC in 2014. Charles Brindamore was chair of our board at that time. The marching orders for Ottawa were pretty clear that getting a backstop for earthquake was job one. We're not there yet. But we're going to include it in the conversation today, even though it's not technically a climate issue. But next slide, please, Danica. Thanks. I think you all know who IBC is. So we're the National Association for the Property and Casualty Insurance industry, and as Alistair pointed out, really, we've evolved to try to advocate to governments and regulators with solutions in mind, and I'm going to get into that in a little bit more detail shortly. Next slide, please. And this is why we're talking today. So, these numbers are, you're not strangers to these numbers. The important thing to register on this slide, and now we're seeing this year in and year out, is that, back in 2016, we had the Fort Mac fire, one massive event that drove losses in that year. Back in 1997, we had the ice storm. Now in Quebec. Now what we're seeing, though, year in and year out, are events, catastrophic events across the entire country that are aggregating into multi-billion-dollar losses. And our industry, of course, is built to weather this. We are, we're doing okay. Overall our numbers are still good, but the real issue here is this directly translates into affordability challenges for your normal homeowner. When a lot of focus in this country when we talk about housing affordability is around interest rates. But the last time I checked my home mortgage, it hits me on the principal side, but I'm not paying a tremendous amount more in my monthly payments. But absent from that whole conversation is how this is affecting homeowners across the country. How extreme weather as translated into their property insurance and car insurance premiums, because anybody living in Alberta knows that hail plays a factor in car insurance premiums as well. This is a trend which is compounding to the problems that we're already facing across the country around home affordability. And it's, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but this is not a P&C issue. This is a consumer homeowner issue that we're seeing, and that discussion is completely absent from the public policy debate today. So anyway, I wanted to tee up the conversation with that. Next slide, please. So again, more frequent and severe floods, wildfires, hailstorms, windstorms, hurricanes, extreme heat events, all influenced by a change in climate, are costing billions of dollars, not to us, not just to us, but to taxpayers, homeowners. And meanwhile, earthquake remains an existential risk to our industry, sorry. And it's not treated with urgency by governments yet. So what I want to tee up with the presentation is I'm going to walk through what we're trying to accomplish with our collective advocacy on NatCat preparedness. I'm going to give you some insight into what our strategy and tactics are. What we've been working on, what we've been doing over the last 7 to 8 years, particularly since Trudeau took power in Ottawa. I'm going to delve into briefly the results to date of this advocacy. But then, Alistair and I are going to have a sort of fireside chat to kind of dive into, the reasons behind the successes and the reasons behind the failures. And we need to be candid that we're not where we want to be in several areas, and what to expect in the next 18 to 24 months. So that's our plan through this 90-minute session. Here's our strategic objectives. This is what the IBC board has asked us, to try to achieve, or to achieve. We're going to achieve it. But it's really these three things. First, secure a backstop and arrest contagion to prevent industry collapse in the event of a severe earthquake. That's the existential threat. It's job number one, and it remains that way. Second, partner with governments to ensure residences at high risk of flooding have access to overland flood insurance, but ensure that governments continue to own that problem. We don't own it, they do, due to past land use policy decisions, permitting decisions. And that's where obviously we've had a fair degree of success lately, and we'll dive into what that solution, that national high risk flood insurance program looks like, and next steps around it. And the third one is, and this is important, this has been stressed by our membership, over the last few years, is that, the evidence from elsewhere around the world is that no residential high-risk flood insurance program will be successful unless there are auxiliary risk reduction initiatives put in place, from flood mapping, elevating consumer awareness, risk mitigation investments. And so we're going to dive into that a little bit as well. But those are the marching orders that frankly I have in Ottawa. Those are the priorities. Next slide. So I'm going to use 2015 as a baseline because that's when the Trudeau government took power. And that's sort of the marker, because we've been, they've now been there for 8 years. I think it's good to use that as sort of our timeline around what have we achieved in that time, what have we not achieved, and kind of walk through that 8-year period. When we started, when the government took over, there was really no awareness of earthquake risk at Public Safety Canada or at Finance Canada or at CMHC. So we had done work with OSFI, with the regulator, around capital requirements dating back to the 1990s, but that hadn't translated in any sort of awareness of the prudential risk at finance or elsewhere. There was also pretty low awareness of flood risk, even after the 2013 Calgary floods and 2013 Toronto floods. There was a pretty low awareness of flood risk at Public Safety Canada and finance. And climate change, of course, was emerging at that time as a political priority, but the bureaucracy was really ill-equipped to advance programming at the pace their new political masters expected them to. Next slide, please. And of course, consumers were also, similarly ill-prepared from an awareness perspective. There was relatively high consumer awareness of earthquake risk in BC. We have one of the highest earthquake insurance take-up rates in the world, but as you know, very low in Quebec. Low consumer awareness of flood risk. A great study out of the University of Waterloo that only 6% of those that live in high-risk areas for flooding are aware that they're at high risk. And at that time, and there was good survey work that came out of the University of Montreal, Quebec at Montreal, that basically took a look at how the public, through public opinion research, how the public viewed severe weather events. And back in 2015, the widespread view was that these were one-off fluke events. They weren't part of an overall pattern. They weren't attributable to climate change. That's really where we were at in 2015. As you'd expect, that has now changed. There's little doubt, I think, and in fact, they've quantified it through their polling. There's little doubt amongst most Canadians now that what we're seeing is part of a broader trend and will continue into the future. Next slide, please. So given all this, and Alistair alluded to this earlier, the strategy that we took with the federal government was, we weren't going to walk in the door and say, here are our problems, fix our problems for us. That's not the way, frankly, you achieve results with government relations on any topic, usually. And certainly not with this, which were highly complex issues and pretty big asks. So what we needed to do was to position ourselves to say, look, you may not be aware of it, Minister of Finance, Minister of Public Safety, but you've got a problem. And it's the same problem that we've got, and we need to work on it together. We need to have a shared approach in partnership, and we will work with you collaboratively to address this for both from perspective of the federal government and its treasury, from the perspective of the insurance industry, but in particular with respect to consumers. And so positioning that way out of the gate was important from a strategy. And there were 5 key tactics that fell out of that. One, on earthquake, we didn't bother, running around Ottawa trying to convince a lot of members of parliament that earthquake was a problem that they needed to worry about. We took a laser focus on the one entity that could fix the problem and address, really fix it, and that was Finance Canada. And for better or for worse, that is where we've invested almost all of our interests. We've elevated to the Prime Minister's office, but really it was our focus has been on working closely with the officials within Finance Canada to help educate, cultivate, and work with them to try to get to a solution. Second tactic was to leverage these CAT events. So up until 2015, we were calling them severe weather events. We weren't talking about climate change. We weren't talking about an overall pattern. Starting in 2016, every single CAT event that went out, every single press release that went out, CAT IQ, usually a month after the event, talks about the losses with the event, attributable to the event. We leveraged those media releases with common language about the overall trend on climate change and the need for governments to act on it. And every release since 2016 that we've put out, and there's been hundreds and hundreds of them, have had that language in them. And so it was to try to draw the linkage and to cultivate journalists across the country that this was part of a wider trend. Climate allies, third tactic, we aligned ourselves pretty closely, I'll get into this, with the Trudeau government's climate agenda. And we advanced our flood insurance asks for a national flood insurance program within that context. We've broadened our tent. We've allied with key groups such as the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, the Canadian Climate Institute, the International Institute on Sustainable Development, Smart Prosperity Institute, voices that have a lot of traction, frankly, with this government in Ottawa. We've allied with them. We've done reports with them, and more recently, as we'll get into, we've launched a collaboration, a big coalition called Climate Proof Canada. I'll touch on that as well. And then finally, be specific. We have two big asks, frankly, two really big asks with an earthquake backstop and a national flood insurance program. But along the way, there were some helpful pieces of the puzzle that we could push that weren't as heavy lifts. And we tried to be as specific and build the cases around those needing to be implemented along the way as well. And I'll get into those. So those are sort of the 5 tactics, and I'm going to delve into each of them for you. Next slide, please. So first, laser focus on Finance Canada, how to demonstrate that we have a shared problem. So back in 2016, we contracted 2 key reports. One was with the C.D. Howe Institute. We engaged the former OSFI superintendent, Nick Le Pen, to speak about the systemic financial risk that would attribute from comprehensive insurance failure in the case of a major earthquake. And Nick famously, and it received a lot of media attention at the time, said, it's not a case of if, but when this happens, and we're absolutely not prepared. And then the second complementary report was from the Conference Board of Canada, which basically took a look at the macroeconomic effects. Again, not just our problem as an industry, societal problem. And it spoke to what would happen to supply chains, what would happen basically to GDP, what would happen to trade corridors in the case of a severe quake in BC, and how this would essentially lead to economic stagnation or recession as a result of our ill preparedness and the fact we wouldn't be able to recover quickly, in particular because the insurance industry would be devastated. And so those 2 reports did what they were designed to do. Next slide, please. They got the attention of finance, the Minister of Finance, that was Minister Morneau at the time. And after they were published in 2016, in 2017, when they launched the financial sector, every 5 years they do a review of governing financial sector legislation, including the Insurance Companies Act. And the minister's office directed the department to factor it into the 5-year review. And that was great news. It meant we were on a formal track to trying to find a solution. And we thought at that time, that's it. By 2022, it's a 5-year review. By 2022, we will have legislative changes that will implement a backstop and the other pieces that we wanted. Well, that was not to happen. We've along the way, over the last 5 years, or now it's 7 years, we have worked closely with Finance Canada, and you see this sort of captures the sort of the key milestones along that timeline. Next slide, please. It'll be easier to read on the next slide. I'll go into it a bit more. And what we've done is we've, again, addressed this as not just the backstop, but trying to work with finance to develop a comprehensive earthquake solution that would address essentially 3 key problems. One that's ours, and 2 that are government problems. The first was to address the possibility of widespread insurer collapse through direct failures and contagion resulting from a severe earthquake. We're all very familiar with that. The second, though, were 2 government problems. And we said, we will help you address these in a sort of quid pro quo. First, directing the direct addressing the direct exposure of government treasuries resulting from protection gaps, existing protection gaps, market failure in Quebec, product design and coverage gaps in BC, and address consumer exposure due to lack of take-up and those gaps. So what we put on the table and what we've been working on over the last few years is essentially a comprehensive solution to address all of those pieces. We contracted KPMG to deliver an in-depth view of the state of the earthquake insurance market so that Finance Canada would have a clear, transparent view of what our market looks like across the country. And we contracted ICLR to work with our members to develop a comprehensive solution to these problems. That was submitted to Finance in January 2023. The takeaway from all this is, once we agreed we had a shared problem, and we have, it was to gain commitment to solve it, and we even gave them our best thinking on how it could be solved. So that's where we got to on earthquake. Next slide, please. The second tactic was to leverage CAT events to elevate awareness of overall risk in Canada. We're a reactive society. Short of having a significant quake, we had to leverage what we do have in order to raise awareness that we need to build a culture of preparedness across the country, and we're just simply not ready for anything. Next slide, please. So we all know these events. I've spoken to the way we leverage them with media releases, and now we think that's successful. There, journalists, Canadians, politicians are generally connecting the dots between these, and it's important because as soon as you accept the fact that this is part of a pattern, not fluke events, but it's a pattern that's going to continue into the future, then that drives the greater need for preparedness. Next slide. Behind the scenes, we worked very carefully with the Prime Minister's office, with, in particular, Minister Goodale and Minister Blair and Minister McKenna, and then lately, more recently, with Minister Guilbeault. And we did this by feeding them our best data, our best information, our best detail. We gave them a heads up about our media releases. We gave them the trend numbers. They've all quoted IBC repeatedly. The Prime Minister has quoted IBC on the need to be better prepared, and everything, the climate emergency, and you'll see the IBC numbers and the trends and the graphs generally used in government correspondence, government releases themselves, this isn't anywhere where we were when we started out in 2015 and 2016, but we got to this place by time we had the floods in Ottawa across Eastern Canada in 2017. This was sort of a pretty well-established relationship with federal cabinet ministers. Next slide, please. And what that led to was in 2017, Minister Goodale was convinced. At that point, he was convinced that we weren't ready, that we needed some sort of flood insurance solution, some sort of public-private partnership. And in a key meeting that Don and I attended in his office, he said, "I'm going to fix this. I'm going to launch a process which will get us to that national flood insurance program." And so in May 2017, he signaled he was going to launch the effort. A number of our CEOs got together in Regina that November, and the Advisory Council on Flooding was launched. Now, the process was interrupted by, we met for 2 years. That process produced a report, but there wasn't enough traction. And then there was a federal election, and we essentially had to almost start all over again with a new Minister of Public Safety and a new approach. Luckily, in November 2020, that Federal Task Force on Flood Insurance, which was sort of that more concrete approach, was appointed. And under Minister Blair's guidance, that task force basically met. It it involved number of industry representatives, involved the provinces and territories. It involved Indigenous representation, and they came out with their final report in August of 2022. The backstop to this was nested within that broader climate advocacy, climate alliance that we had built. And as Alistair alluded to, it all culminated this past March with the announcement that the government is going to establish a national flood insurance program. And we'll get into more details on that. Next slide, please. And I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. The fourth tactic was to broaden our tent. You know, there are a lot of voices out there talking about energy efficiency. There's a very coordinated advocacy movement around climate change on the emission reduction side, but we didn't have that on the adaptation side, and so we sought to address that. And so before the last election, IBC pulled together a number of our members who were interested, and as well as over 25 other groups into a coalition called Climate Proof Canada. And that coalition put together election platform recommendations, did a lot of work during the federal election back in 2021, and to pretty great success. Next slide, please. Here's a list of the groups that are involved. It's somewhat up to date. This is from our website. You can find out more about this from climateproof.ca is the name, is the website address if anyone's interested. Next slide, please. And then be specific. And so from 2016, recognizing that we had some big chunks to bite off with the backstop and with the National Flood Insurance Program, we also tried to get small wins that contribute along the way. Now, as I mentioned, our membership had said, as observed in Australia and in the UK, you know, no flood insurance program, government-run flood insurance program, is going to succeed unless you have investments in risk reduction, unless you have effective investments in flood mapping, unless you have investments in consumer awareness. And so we also tried to get those along the way. And unlike Australia and the UK, we actually got the investments in risk reduction in particularly in infrastructure, flood resilient infrastructure. We got those investments before we got the flood insurance program. It's the reverse in those other countries. They're fighting to get those after the program's been set up. But back in 2017, we were successful in getting a $2 billion commitment from Infrastructure Canada for a disaster mitigation and adaptation fund. It's been topped up twice. It was topped up with $1.4 billion in 2021, and then about another $500 million in 2020, last fall in 2023. We also, and that program is being completely revamped, and we're hopeful for much more significant funding coming up in federal budget 2024, and we're working on that. Also, we've been successful in getting flood mapping investments again in 2021, topped up in 2023, and investments on a flood portal, which was first announced and funded in 2019, and then re-announced and funded again in this past federal budget. And so there's been these sort of wins along the way that are complementary to our overall objective and will frankly help. But we were, you know, we had to be very specific in what those look like. Next slide, please. So where are we now? So Climate Proof Canada, as a result of pulling that coalition together, we advocated with the two leading political parties federally, so the Liberals and the Conservatives, and did our best to make climate adaptation a election platform issue. We did succeed. We ended up writing both of the platforms. In fact, the Conservatives went first, and it was so problematic because the Liberals were like, we can't sound just like the Conservative platform. We have to do things differently. So a number of items had to be reworded, et cetera. But for the most part, we received a number of commitments in the 2 election platforms as a result of that broader tent approach. These translated into mandate letter commitments. Now, a mandate letter is the Prime Minister, after an election, appoints the cabinet ministers and says, this is your to-do list. This is what you're going to be evaluated on. These are the things you have to deliver on. And luckily for us, the flood insurance program, as a result of the platform commitment made into Minister Blair's mandate letter, and he was tasked with seeing that task force through and making sure that it, through a fight, as it turned out with Finance Canada, managed to get funded. But there are a number of other mandate letter commitments out there that are in. Some of them they've moved ahead with, but some of them they haven't. So Minister Guilbeault has commitments from this list. Minister Wilkinson has commitments from this list. Minister LeBlanc at Infrastructure Canada has commitments, and we're seeing varying degrees of success in the follow through and meeting those promises. Next slide, please. This is my last slide. So we've had some success. We've had, a big step forward in the last federal budget on the funding, finally, of a national flood insurance program and a timeline for it being set up. But this guy stood up at an insurance company in London back in September of 2015. It was 3 weeks before Trudeau won the election for that basically made him Prime Minister for the first time. And although we probably didn't know it at the time, this speech made by Mark Carney at Lloyd's was a game changer when it came to global financial flows with regards to preparing basically to decarbonization. This was before the Paris Accord was signed, agreed to by 195 countries in 2016. But what Mark argued for was for a transition, basically funded by the financial sector, with a move away from carbon-based assets towards greener, low-emitting assets. He did this at an insurance company for a reason. Our sector are the poster childs out there for managing risk. And we were, of course, the first to ring the alarm bells back in the 1980s around about climate change being a thing to worry about. But that focus on emission reduction has pretty well sucked all the air out of the room. We've come such a long way since he made that speech. Now it's, we're talking about transition regularly, transition finance. The last federal budget, right, basically put $40 billion, didn't focus on housing affordability, which is what we all expected. It put $40 billion into greening our electricity grid. That was the single big item in this past budget, directly tied to that speech. And so essentially, there's been an enormous amount of work done by our federal government, enormous amount of focus on emission reduction, but not enough on the issues that we care about, which is protecting Canadians, making sure that this country is more resilient to the events that we're now witnessing almost on a monthly basis. I'll stop there and look forward to our chat, Alistair.
Thank you, Craig. And I will encourage folks to signal their interest in asking Craig questions just by raising their hand or putting something in the chat, just to get things started. I mean, just to finish off as you did with Governor Carney's kind of, I think, transformational remarks. Part of the challenge that you must have faced in your work in Ottawa on behalf of the industry is this idea that by encouraging the government to invest a penny in adaptation, they're having to concede that they're not going to be able to do enough on emission reduction. It's almost like you're going to fail, so you got to do this as well. So how have you achieved kind of this shift in the government's thinking closer to, yes, we're going to work everything we can to tax carbons and finance a transition and reduce emissions and contribute to the global reduction to net zero to get us below the 1.5% or 1.5% degrees of temperature and all that stuff. But in the meantime, come on, Ottawa, there's going to be more weather. There's going to be more wind, more water, more fire, and we have to do more to adapt. So how have you structured that balance when they have to almost concede defeat in order to agree to what we're asking for?
Well, we have not been successful. That's the bottom line. This government has done the bare minimum that they could possibly do, and in my opinion, being maybe too close to it over the last decade. But they've done probably the bare minimum that they could do in the face of all these events that we've witnessed. And what I mean by that is this country, our share of global emissions has decreased from 2% of global emissions in 2005 to 1.5% of global emissions. We can't solve the problem by ourselves. We can have we could cut our emissions to zero, and we won't be successful in addressing the problem and limiting global temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial times. So yes, we have to be leaders globally, right? Of course, we need to be global. We need to be leaders globally because we're facing these losses in an outsized way compared to many other countries around the world. So we need to be aggressive on emission reduction. But at the same time, we should be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. And investing in adaptation doesn't mean giving up. It's accepting the reality that we are not going to solve this as a country by ourselves. We can't. There's the trains left the station, and we're not going to hit peak temperatures until much later this century. And so these events are going to get worse and worse and worse. And we're warming at twice the rate of most of the rest of the world, according to Natural Resources Canada. So if that's the case, how can we not invest in preparedness? How can we not be taking this full on at the same time and have a very aggressive approach to investing in risk reduction, to making sure that we are, we can't, how can we possibly be kicking changes to our building codes to down the road to 2030 to make way for emissions, building codes that deal with energy efficiency, but not with flood resilience or wildfire resilience or wind resilience? And that's what's happened. And so this is it is a significant problem. And we as an industry shouldn't be shy. We need to be we kind of, maybe a bit naively thought that if we allied with the government, that we would, that they would take adaptation seriously at the same time. They haven't. We've gotten one big one in the last federal budget, but it wasn't easy. And so we've got a year ahead. We're probably headed into an election. A lot of us think that we're headed into an election in 2024, and we're going to have to make a lot of noise to make sure that adaptation is elevated in not just the government, but also in the opposition parties' lexicon.
Wow. Okay, so that's a bit on the gloomy perspective on the last 7 years, despite the accomplishments. Let's go to the accomplishment. We actually get a promise to stand up mechanism. Now, the dollar commitment there is less than 100 million versus the 40 billion that you mentioned earlier for other priorities around greening infrastructure. And less than 100 million, I suspect most insurers on this call have a lot more capital than that. And so it doesn't feel even like that big a number. what are the next steps in standing up a mechanism in partnership between our sector and Ottawa? What happens next on that?
So despite the gloominess in my last answer, here's the bright spot. This is now firmly on the radar with the Prime Minister's office. We have a champion in Minister Blair. We have now a government department with Public Safety Canada that understands this issue inside and out. And we have a commitment by Finance Canada now to insert themselves and engage in this very directly. So this is going to be moving forward a shared effort between Public Safety Canada and Finance Canada in landing on what a national flood insurance program looks like. And CMHC will likely have a role to play. So the next steps are, there's two big pieces. One is, who's going to manage this thing? Is this going to be, an existing Crown corporation? Is it going to be, an existing one like CMHC? Or is it going to be something external? They need to figure that out in pretty short order. Our expectation is we'll know the answer to that question within a year. We're hoping we'll know the answer. It'll be publicly announced. The second piece is then, what does that flood insurance program look like, and how does it interface with our industry? When it comes down to it, I mean, our offer is this should be seamless for consumers. We can, our companies, can handle the product distribution. They can handle the claims administration. All government needs to do really is a bookkeeping exercise, tracking, the money that's going in and out of the door. They need the governance piece, how is it going to be administered? And then they need to identify, address some of the other issues in collaboration with the provinces around how to make premiums affordable in high-risk areas. So the whole incentive piece is another piece they need to look at. But really, as far as the delivery of it, we can take on a lot of it as a partner. In exchange for cost recovery for fees, but we can take on a lot of it. That's what we've put in front of them, and that's where we think they're going to go, which makes it ideally a lighter lift for them. And so the next steps is essentially getting involved in those direct discussions. We expect that CEOs will meet with Minister Blair next month to start that process.
Super. And if you think about standing up a mechanism, and then you're at that table and you're kind of doing the checklist of the toughest public policy design problems that you're going to have to work through. And obviously you mentioned governance and the degree to which it's integrated with the private sector. But these issues around accessibility, affordability, degree of subsidization for higher risk, and then I guess the moral hazard problem, if we solve flood, and so people can afford to continue to live and build more in high-risk areas, that doesn't actually get us the solution we're looking for. So, like, how do we create less moral hazard while we're trying to solve the public policy problem? How would you kind of list, rank, and think about the kind of toughest policy problems ahead?
What we think is that and I am speculating. I have no confirmed insight into this, but my speculation is that the way that the federal budget announcement was written, the federal government is going to take on responsibility for standing this thing up and recapitalizing it, whatever that looks like. But then as far as ongoing operations, they're going to be negotiating with the provinces around that. And particularly, it's going to be that subsidy piece. How do you keep this affordable? How do you subsidize premiums and do it in a smart way so that they are risk-based and drive the right incentives or disincentives that you want them to drive, but at the same time they're means tested. Those that can afford to pay a $5,000 a year flood premium should pay it. If they're living on nice waterfront, in a multi-million-dollar house, they should pay it. But for those that can't afford it, what does that look like? What does that subsidy look like, and who's going to pay it in an ongoing way? And we think that that will be a province by province. My view is it's probably going to be a province by province discussion. And to avoid cross-subsidization between those jurisdictions which are more responsible and those jurisdictions which are less responsible. And that's going to be the thorniest issue, is going to be around how is that designed, who's going to pay for that ongoing subsidy. And then there's the auxiliary pieces, which is what do you do about new builds? You know, what do you, how do you construct, you know, do you exempt them? They are not eligible for the flood insurance program going forward, nor are they eligible for disaster financial assistance. You know, what do you do about new builds with respect to this? And then how do you reward those jurisdictions that invest in, you know, infrastructure that de-risks homes? How do you track all that? How do you measure how resilient, you know, at a property level a home is, what its relative flood exposure is, and how is that disclosed? Whether by industry, by real estate agents, by banks, by governments, how is that disclosed in a way that's aligned? So there's all of these issues that are tricky, that remain to be sorted out in the months ahead.
Thanks for that. New PACICC board member Mark Littman is doing his duty in sending a question, segueing to Quake. But Mark, just humor me for a little bit longer, because we will get to that. But there's a couple of other things that I think Craig and I were going to try and just make sure we talk through. So Craig, the first one, we have got these various signals from the superintendent of OSFI, for instance, that there's going to be some bias to the approach, that whatever is stood up, as the verb seems to be for flood, could be a mechanism that also was utilized by Ottawa to tackle other perils, which might even include quake. So how are we thinking about this multi-peril bias that seems to have been signaled in Ottawa, especially in the context of other jurisdictions that may have done single peril solutions, US flood, multi-peril solutions like the UK, where they've put, you know, nuclear and terror and flood in the same pool somehow. So we must be looking at other jurisdictions, and we must be thinking about how we move things forward in Ottawa. Where are you guys in your strategy around multi-peril?
So this, we expect, and based upon what we've heard from Minister Blair's office, we expect this will be designed to be expandable. That the focus will be first on flood, but then it would possibly be it'll be designed to be expandable to other perils. You know, they're watching the wildfire situation in California, and the tension that's occurred with insurers in California, you know, and then taking a look at hurricanes in Louisiana and Florida, where frankly insurers have mostly vacated, and they're looking at that and thinking, well, how long can insurers deal with year after year of wildfires, for instance, in Western Canada? Now, we've been lucky. We haven't had a lot of structures burn. But if this gets worse, and it's going to get worse, you know, will that have an impact? Will we continue to cover hail in Calgary, right? And what do you do in those situations? So that's one thing that's on their radar, is this needs to be expandable to address emerging protection gaps if they occur. You know, we've got high risk flood. Are we going to end up with, you know, high risk hail, high risk hurricane down the road? And make sure that this can, if our industry begins to move out of these areas and if protection gaps, you know, emerge, you know, maybe it won't be a full retreat, but it may be coverage limits go down to a very low level or deductibles go high. They're able to step in and say, okay, we're going to factor that in. The second thing they're looking at is earthquake. So when Superintendent Rutledge made those comments to you last fall, he made them because we were proposing a flood insurance pool that would pool these risks. And his expectation was you couldn't diversify high risk floods sufficiently across jurisdiction because it's happening across the country. So you may need to diversify it with other perils like earthquake in order to keep the pool functional. And so That's why, in his view, a multi-peril approach is the way to go. Now, we have signaled that earthquake, yes, is a priority, but flood is where most of the thinking has happened so far, and we're much further ahead, much more sophisticated in the thinking that Public Safety Canada understands it better. So let's get flood done first, and then add others instead of starting at the gate with multi-peril. But we've signaled that we're very amenable to considering what a multi-peril solution would look like, and would be happy to lend our expertise, our industry expertise, to helping design that. So,
thanks for that. So one more question on kind of the flood part of this story, and then I do. It's a PACICC session after all, so we do need to spend a bit of time on quake. And Mark's question is going to be a good one for that. But just one other part of the challenge facing you and IBC in this regard is that Canada is a complicated federation. And so, yes, it's nice that Ottawa is engaged fully on the flood problem, but the floods happen in provinces. And there's already disaster assistance programs, and provinces have their own strategies and perspectives and interests here. So how are we aligning the government relations activities of you and the Ottawa group around what's also happening province by province on flood?
So at the end of the day, this will only be successful if provinces participate, and if enough provinces, frankly, participate to make it viable. The feds have a few tricks up their sleeve with getting the provinces to engage. They're basically revamping their disaster financial assistance arrangements program, which is the big pot of money that refunds provinces once they put out money to homeowners post-event. It's billions of dollars we're talking about, and they have signaled that they're going to choreograph the changes to that program with the rollout of the flood insurance program. These two things will be linked, and also they have some regulations on the books, potential regulations on the books with regards to regulating what are called special flood hazard zones across the country. They're going to be drawing a line on the map saying these are areas that are special flood hazard zones. And by the way, if new builds in those zones won't be eligible for Infrastructure Canada funding, won't be, so they actually can, through their spending power, and there's some regulatory power there to address what happens in those zones. Those are on the books with Environment Canada. So they're looking at they're looking at all the incentives that they can deal with, but they're also looking at disincentives and sticks as well. And so it'll be interesting to see over the next few months how they roll those out. And it'll probably be actually a year to 18 months before we see that. But that means that IBC needs to be coordinating. Now, we've focused almost entirely on the federal government, but we need to be focusing on the provinces and basically signaling to the provinces why they would want to engage in this program. And from our perspective as insurers, what they can expect. We're already getting questions around, well, how big of a problem do I have in BC? How many homes are high risk? How many of them are not eligible for insurance, right? And so helping answer some of those questions so that they know the scale. BC is an easy one. That's not a good example, but Saskatchewan, Ontario, these are the provinces, and then Quebec, which always likes to do its own thing anyway, differently than the feds. Why should Quebec participate in a federal government run program? These will be, we'll need on the ground GR in each of those places to encourage that provinces step up and engage.
Well, I hadn't properly appreciated the degree to which the federal government could actually draw the lines around high risk in a way that could be that meaningful. That's actually really important part of this, because if it's just the industry drawing what I think traditionally have been called red lines, that's not optimal. To have the government doing it is way better. And I hadn't appreciated that Ottawa might be able to do that. That's super interesting and very useful. All right, so let's just selfishly go back to the reality that Mark is politely signaling in his chat question here. So, you know, flood is important, but it's not systemic. It is very hard to model a flood big enough short of NOAA to cause a single Canadian insurance company to fail, much less the whole industry. Whereas Canada is deeply exposed to a systemic quake event that could cause horrific damage to a section of Canada, whether west or central, and cause serial failure of insurers, including major ones, with all kinds of gloomy consequences. So is there a risk that the flood success story, which you've just described, actually ends up distracting from the more serious and potentially way more costly earthquake issue?
So that's a great question, and it's and the answer to that is actually quite interesting. We have been successful behind the scenes with getting Finance Canada seized, at least within the financial sector policy branch, with earthquake as a prudential issue, as a threat, not just to us, but to others in the financial sector. And they actually pushed and wanted to start with earthquake. We know that. The problem we've faced, though, is that we didn't have the political buy-in on quake. You know, we've had a pandemic which distracted. We have the Ukraine conflict, which has distracted at the political level. We have, political level that is seized with emission reduction. And to try to get the attention on quake, even if there were willing allies within the Department of Finance, it would be very difficult. And so when we had to figure out, okay, we got to push something over the line, a National Flood Insurance Program is already in a mandate letter with Minister Blair. And so now the question is, okay, we have this success. How can we leverage that in order to how can we set this up in a way so that seismic follows pretty quickly afterwards? And what do we want that to look like? And so, so I think that I actually believe that this will expedite an earthquake solution, that rather than distract from it, I actually think the National Flood Insurance Program will expedite it, because that's actually where Finance Canada wants this to go.
That's very interesting and a bit reassuring as well. So why has this been so hard? I mean, you described the other priorities that current events have inflicted on this government. But like, if I think about your timeline, you had the 2016 and the work of IBC. If I recall correctly, there was a 2013 PACICC paper about systemic risk that kind of triggered the whole discussion. But that's a decade now that we have been earnestly trundling up to Ottawa and making a case and talking to the super smart group in finance that's been aware of this issue and working on this issue. Like, what is it? Simply because we haven't had a recent significant shake that people are just thinking there's other more urgent priorities? Is that as simple as that?
Well, it's partly that. We're a very reactive society. But also, and I'm being very candid here. Also, I think it's a function of this particular government taking on a lot and dealing with a lot of other issues, and being very concerned with its role on the global stage. To the degree that, look, when we had I'll give you an example, we had the SARS epidemic, in H1N1 back in 2008, 2009. And Public Health Agency of Canada, which was newly formed, came up with and developed a pandemic strategy as a reaction to those events. We had a change of government. And unfortunately, the chief public health officer at the time, Dr. Butler Jones, passed on. And so now you're 10 years later, 10 years later, no one remembered that strategy. And in fact, the pandemic strategy was like died. It was nowhere. And today, even though we've just had a massive pandemic that completely outpaced H1N1 and SARS, we have not had any sort of investigation around how effective that pandemic, our response was. We don't have a new pandemic strategy. And so if we don't, right after a pandemic, if we're not taking a look at how can we better prepare for future pandemics, even if we had a moderate earthquake, would that cause this government to take earthquakes seriously, or would they just say, oh, well, that one's done, we're not going to have another one for 500 years? And so there's this overall, and this gets back to my unfortunately bleak opinions on our response around climate adaptation. Even though we've had these wildfires and floods and Hurricane Fiona, we haven't seen the interest in a level of preparedness in becoming more prepared as a society. We haven't seen, we seem content. This government has unfortunately seemed content to just say, we're going to deal with these as one-off issues, except for that announcement on flood. So it's a lift. It's a heavy lift on earthquake. We're hoping that the flood piece will translate to it. But to answer your question directly, it has been hard, and I don't know why it's this hard. It doesn't seem like it should be. But there's there are too many issues and other interests by those in the government in Ottawa. So.
Okay, that's I think very good for this group to hear. And so maybe going next to what can we do to help? So there is an IBC effort to align on flood and partner with the federal government, and over time work out how to align with the efforts we'll need to achieve at each of the provinces. What can people in the industry at senior levels here be doing to ensure that you are as successful as possible?
So I think as an industry, there's a key question we need to ask ourselves, which is the banks have set themselves up, to be essentially the go-to by Finance Canada when they want to understand the trajectory of the economy, right? So you get the chief economist from every bank out there talking about, are we going to have a recession? Are we not going to have a recession, right? Sun Life now has a chief economic officer who's also a go-to for the federal government when they want to understand not just the asks around a national pharmacare program, for instance, but what is Sun Life's view of given its role in the Canadian economy? We don't have that as an industry. We're not. Our dealings with Ottawa, and particularly with Finance Canada, are very transactional, and we need to think about how do we position ourselves better as a go-to, not just on earthquake, not just on flood, but geez, we're experts. We're experts on financial risk. We're experts on economic risk. How can we better position ourselves with the department, to be a go-to on these issues, and while doing that and supporting them, with our data, with our insights, we're educating them, frankly, on why these issues are so important to our industry, and frankly should be of interest to them, given their role and what they're concerned with fiscal policy across the country, and being custodians of the federal treasury. So that's one thing that we can do is we need to look at ourselves and say, is there a way here we can elevate our game? And then secondly, we need to be probably a bit more outspoken on these issues. We've played very nice. We've played very, very nice. We have been great allies around the climate agenda. Perhaps naively thinking, and this is pointing to myself, that that would translate pretty readily into aggressive action on climate adaptation. It hasn't, not to the degree we'd like it to. And so do we need to be a little bit more noisy? Do we need to get out there and say, look, you're not doing enough? And it's one thing for IBC to do that, but companies should be ideally out there themselves, trying to, in a much more public way, saying this country's not doing enough given the risks that it face. Now, admittedly, some companies are out there doing some of that, but I think we need to do that in a much more aggressive way. We have a promising year ahead of us because we are in this pre-election time and where governments are going to want to play nice and geez, they've got to be thinking, I know they are thinking, geez, what if we have a wildfire or a massive flood during the next election campaign? How, based upon how the existing government has performed so far, is that going to help or hurt them? And so that's a very real possibility. So we should be thinking about that. And what is our, from a company perspective or from an industry perspective, what do we do about that?
Super helpful. And the idea that we need to be more outspoken. In the end, the private sector has, over the last decade, as I said at the start, moved a huge way forward in providing a whole bunch of risk transfer solutions on issues like this. But there is a limit. And that limit will get lower. We will do less. We will be able to do less if the problem becomes more severe. And it seems likely the problem will be more severe. And so adaptation is really the only way to address this and needs to be at least parallel in importance with the emission reduction, one would have thought. So I think just working out how as an industry to articulate that, individual companies and IBC, and finding other allies to amplify that point feels critical to me. Listen, conscious of time, Craig, I need some practical advice from you. So since PACICC first raised this issue in 2013 around systemic risk from quake, the strategy has been earthquake backstop. It seemed like a very logical ask. It was adopted by the IBC board as a priority and still is on your checklist, your number one. But one of the conclusions the PACICC board took from that was that any kind of other efforts by PACICC to address this issue might reduce the pressure on Ottawa to solve the big problem. And so we should kind of stay status quo because the backstop is the priority and we should get that. And if we make changes incrementally to PACICC or work on other options for how to address systemic risk, Ottawa might just say, well, it looks like the industry's thinking of solving it itself and we don't have to spend any more time on it. A decade later, should PACICC and the industry start exploring alternative ways to deal with this kind of peak peril risk transfer problem? Or should we continue to trust to the system to fix this before the big shake happens?
Maybe 3 years ago, I would answer this differently, Alistair. I would have more faith in the system, but earthquake was explicitly factored in based upon ministerial direction into the 5-year review of the financial sector legislative framework. That was in 2017. We're 6 years on from that. So we've been on a formal track for 6 years. We don't have an answer. We really have no clue on where they want to land, what a solution might look like. And so given that reality, and although I am cautiously optimistic that the flood piece will pave the way for an earthquake, we would be silly not to be looking at other options. Maybe the federal government just ain't going to solve this for us. And if that's the case, we should be researching a plan B and a plan C and starting to move those down the road as well. And you know, it's that would be my advice. And I know I sound jaded, and it's not politically driven. I'm you know, I'm a middle of the road kind of guy. My views, I'm politically agnostic. I have had a lot of faith and worked close and have friends in this government. But we you know, they haven't gone as far as we need them to. And given the risks that we're clearly facing, it's been a little disappointing. And so that's why I would say, Alistair, yeah, we should, as an industry, be looking at Plan B, Plan C, and not relying on the next government to do us any favors if it should change either.
Okay, that's helpful. And I mean, I guess just to confirm, in April, my board agreed to the same conclusion. But the Plan B work was going to stay at our level until we had something that might be credible.
Right.
But it's kind of disappointing to think that, you know, we had a clear logic, a compelling case, and very effective advocacy, and still didn't get anywhere. And so that's, I think, something that we'll all reflect on over this fantastic weekend ahead. So unless I see any other hands raised or other questions come up in the chat, my instinct is that folks might be ready to embrace the May long weekend and celebrate a great Victoria Day, in which case I just want to say thank you to Craig. Really appreciate your engagement on this. Congrats for the progress you've made. And thank you for sharing as openly and directly with us both the upsides that we could achieve out of this stuff, but also the challenges still ahead. I know I'm joined by the whole group here in saying thanks for all your hard work and for your time today. Ian, back over to you.
Absolutely,
Thanks.
Alistair summed that up well. Thank you very much, Craig, for being here, and Alistair for participating in the discussion. Danica is going to post the, we want to give you a heads up on the next event is going to be September 14th. We have a Risk Officers Forum, and we're still working on the agenda for that, but we're going to have C-suite representation talking about perspectives on ERM, and we're going to do a discussion on, at this point, third-party risk. That may change, but for sure, the second discussion is looking at the results of our ERM survey that's going to take place over the summer, and we'll be going to the principal representative for each member company with the ask to respond to the survey in SurveyMonkey. So it's probably going to find its way to your desk, but we're going first, as we should, to the principal representative for each member company. But do watch for that. We'll give you a heads up to all the members in our Risk Officers Forum mailing list that the survey is out in distribution, and you can then talk internally about who's going to answer the questions. And it's one survey per company, per member company. And next, I'm going to follow up very shortly with a satisfaction survey. I'll try to get that to you before you get well into your long weekend. And we do appreciate your feedback. You help to enhance the quality of future broadcasts. Your ideas for speakers and topics, always very, very helpful. And we certainly act on those. So thanks very much. Thanks for joining us today. This concludes our meeting. Enjoy the long weekend. Enjoy your summer. Stay safe, and we will be back to you in September. Thanks very much. Take care.